Well, hello, everyone. To all of our Charleston attendees joining us virtually today, I'd like to welcome you to our lively discussion, Expanding Perspectives, Practical Tips for Bringing Diverse Voices into Collection Development Strategies. My name is Lee Wright, and I'm a product manager here at ProQuest, part of Clarivate, and I'm primarily responsible for our ebook collections and subscriptions, and I'm very thrilled to be the moderator for this session today. I'd like to begin by introducing you to our wonderful panelists who are joining us. Allison Rodriguez, Head of Collection Development at the University of North Texas. Amy Pulowski, Executive Director at OhioLink. Carson Williams, Collection Development Librarian at Cornell University. And finally, Derek Marshall, Associate Professor and Director for Branch Libraries at Mississippi State University. A big thank you to you guys for helping to lead our discussion today. Our goal with this discussion is to provide librarians with practical insights and strategies to bring a more inclusive representation of authors and ideas into library collections. We also aim to help you come out with easy to implement solutions that will enable your library to conduct content audits, harness technology effectively, and prioritize collaborative learning to empower and serve all library patrons. I'd like to remind everyone this is a pre-recorded session, but we are allowing plenty of time for a live Q&A at the end, so please make sure to submit your questions in the available panel. And with that, let's dive in. So to begin with, I'd like to throw out a question to all of our panelists, just to start things off. What challenges do academic librarians commonly face when trying to include more voices in their collections? Additionally, are there any practical tips on how to overcome those challenges? Anyone want to answer first, or shall I call on someone?
I'll go first.
All right, Amy, you unmuted, so you get to go first.
So I'm Amy Pulaski. So I'm going to talk a little bit from the consortial perspective on this area, because the reason that we decided to step into a shared collection consortially was that budgets are tight, which I think everybody is struggling with right now. And in addition to that, my community was talking about the need to collect more within their own collections, bringing in a spectrum of resources around diverse voices. So what we decided to do was I applied for a grant, and we work towards kind of a starting core collection. And the point I'm trying to make here is, if you are participating in a consortia, that might be a good place to start. What I had seen were libraries working on this locally, and I thought, gosh, if we had a core collection that everyone could kind of look from or look to in the center and build off of moving forward, in addition to expanding that collection, that would be a little bit more cost effective than trying to do it all individually.
All right, that's great, Amy. Thank you. All right, how about we jump to Allison?
So, Texas is a little unique. I am an academic librarian in Texas at a public university. And so, as some of you may be aware, and as I know some of you are experiencing as well in your own states, this kind of presents an additional set of legal and political challenges, we'll say, in building diverse collections. Depending on what kind of institution you work for, whether it's state, public, private, so on, you may be more or less affected by this particularly unique set of pressures. One of the strategies that I found to ensure a broad range of voices are present in our collection is to actually look at and utilize institutional data on where students and faculty are from, what languages they speak, and what lived experiences they have. Through this, we're able to build what I am calling a representative collection. Now, obviously, this type of data does not always capture all voices, but as we build our collection, we are cognizant of what we are collecting versus what we are not at the moment, based on this representative data. And so we make attempts to kind of round out the collection with those additional voices when possible.
All right, thank you, Allison.
I'd like to jump in from a branch standpoint. in dealing with branches, we're usually more specialized collections. So a lot of times getting those more diverse titles or materials fall outside of our scope of the particular branch that we're working with, especially most recently I was at the CVM library, the College of Veterinary Medicine, and a lot of those diverse titles don't fit within the normal collection because it is a very specialized medical collection. And getting titles outside of that kind of misses the mark of those seminal important texts that we have to collect. So that's one of the hurdles that we have there.
I think going off of that, that was going to be my main, I think, kind of challenge at Cornell, where I am at. I oversee the social science collection and the science collection for all of Cornell. And one of our biggest problems is finding diverse content for very specific scientific fields. So we have like a very rich poultry collection. And that could be difficult to try and find a diverse aspect to that. So in certain cases, it's just not possible. But we definitely look for non-Western perspectives, especially in the sciences, because that's just something that Americans have made the standard. And so there's a lot of information that we just never collected from different areas back in the day. So I think kind of supplementing older material that is not from the West. So we've been doing that, and also just asking as many people as I can in the departments, students, if I'm ever meeting with a group or a department of students in something like plant sciences, I'll ask them, are there any diverse databases, anything that you know of, please let us know. And just to be very open that we want to hear any suggestion people have, because we don't know everything, and I certainly don't know what's happening in some of these fields more than they would. So
That's great, Carson. Thank you. And in fact, that's a great lead into our next question. Could you share examples of a successful project, past or present, that have incorporated new voices into library collections? And why don't we bounce back to Amy? You said you might have something on this one.
Yeah, so this is well, Lee, read their question one more time, because I think I had a new thought of from different than what we talked
Sure.
about a little earlier. Yeah.
Sure. Could you share examples of a successful project, past or present, that has incorporated new voices into library collections?
Right. Okay. So 2 points. And as we were talking and preparing for this presentation, I think I had mentioned that we worked on a collection statement that was a little bit more broad than completely focused on trying to get to one particular perspective. So we did that with what we call a collection purpose statement. And that purpose statement is intentionally a little bit broader because the specialists that I was working with really wanted to try to gather a large spectrum of voices. So we had talked about, the example of bringing in titles for neurodiversity, and not just focusing specifically on, what we've seen traditionally coming out of diverse collections. So the statement that we have it's intentionally not intentionally broad, but it's a little bit more broad than what you would think, to give that group some space to think about how we're defining diverse voices. In addition to that, this was an OhioLink project, and we do have a policy team, that's the selection team. And what we decided to do was pull in other members of the OhioLink community in this project. So we had a diverse set of voices, not only from those that are doing collection on a regular basis, but somebody working in public service or somebody working more closely with students, bringing them in to make sure that we had an additional perspective when that group was trying to decide on that kind of core collection of titles.
That's great. So you would say having diverse selectors helps inform a diverse collection. All right. Derek, I think you also indicated that you had a project you'd like to speak about.
Sure. So, kind of on a smaller scale for the branch, specifically again to the veterinary medicine, we did two separate projects. One of them, we were fortunate enough to get funding for a diversity collection within the CVM library. So, we purchased both veterinary texts and popular fiction, popular text, anything that would appeal to a wide range of students and the audience. But I think the bigger project that had more traction with the students was that we started a little lending library outside of the physical library space, more in the students' common space, lounging space, and we built that with donations. But we were able to get a lot of really great donations from all avenues, all diverse groups. But that has been in constant rotation, and the students are using that, and I think that hits not only with and representing each student, but it also we have this initiative for the stress relief with students because the veterinary program is so intense. So that was one of the big pushes that we had to try to help get students relaxed, and with that we wanted to make sure that we had something for every student that we represented. So that's a couple of the projects that we've done.
Oh, that's great. I'm going to stick with you for a minute because our next question, I think, is something that you lightly touched on earlier with the first question. How do you balance the inclusion of different perspectives with the preservation of canonical works in library collections?
So when we're purchasing for the medical field, it's more about touching on the disparities in healthcare, that kind of thing, to help supplement the collection. You don't want to just necessarily try to say that you're going to supplement the collection with diverse voices or diverse authors, because that's not always apparent. That's not always, publicly available information kind of thing when you're doing your collection development policy. So really touching on the subject matters more than the authors, I think, is important too.
That's great. And Carson, I see you nodding. Did you have anything you wanted to add to that?
Sorry, I had my mic off.
No
I
worries.
agree. It's very difficult with some of the more specific medical, and I also collect for health sciences as well. And another thing, I guess, is just, being open to some of the materials that are maybe older. I've been looking at the older materials that we have by pulling up like the publish here, especially in these health sciencey topics, because it's hard to look at everything when you're trying to determine is this diverse or not. I've been looking just in the past and pulling out our oldest books to see if they're still relevant, if they are, anything that we need to be keeping around or should be replacing, or thinking ahead, not necessarily that it's all going to be diverse, but when you're selecting to consciously, that's always in your brain, is that I'm looking for the most diverse material that I can. And hopefully that becomes common practice, through all the selectors at the library. But I think we're all very conscious of it. Hopefully every time we're looking for new materials. And so hopefully there will just be more created, for us to purchase in the future. And I think we have a good group of people currently as librarians who are very on the ball about this. So hopefully we'll get something going.
That's great. And then Amy, do you have anything you'd like to add to this one?
Not particularly. That hasn't been said, right? I think it's just giving people the space in my setting to have conversations, to think about these things. And that's kind of the beauty of working on this collection in a consortial environment. Look, what we're doing now, learning from each other, is normal for us as the group gets together and starts thinking about these resources. So as I was thinking, I was like, gosh, if you're not participating in a consortia, what could you do? I think you could easily just put a group of 5 or 6 of your selector friends, you have them, in a room and just start talking about how you're doing things, because there's always something that I'm learning, and I know that they're learning from each other in that environment.
That's
I
great.
agree,
Thank
Amy.
you.
I think that happens a lot, is that we're all doing such great work individually, especially with selecting. It's like a very, just you and the website ordering. So I think it's good to talk and to encourage other selectors to just tell you how they are selecting, because we do it in such different ways, just tiny different ways. But someone could tell you something that you've never heard of, or like a resource that they get books from, and I'm just like, oh my gosh, I should have been doing this. Or like, it's good to just get the process down, I guess, for each person. It can give you, I don't know, a different way of doing things, and it's fun to hear what other selectors are actually selecting.
I'm going to throw a little curveball into the mix here. I'm going to say that what I'm hearing from you guys is almost be willing to break the rules of collection development a little bit. Carson, you mentioned looking at older materials and seeing if they do still have value because there's a different perspective. So maybe something that normally would have been weeded, maybe you're going to keep around a little longer. Maybe you're going to look to purchase something that's a little bit older because it fits other metrics that previously weren't considered. Would you guys say that that's fair?
I would say that I'm not sure about breaking the rules. I don't want to be a rule breaker necessarily, but I do think that we have to improve and kind of adjust the way that we're doing things, especially like you said about looking at the older material. And then it's not about getting rid of the old material because it's, old and outdated and, maybe it has something, it's nothing personal, it never is. It's just that if this was written in a time where, if they're talking about a specific population of people and it's written by a white author and it was written a long time ago on, like a tribe somewhere, perhaps, that is
of course
outdated. But like, even with, is it appropriate or not, but just has there been a better, publication on this same thing from different perspectives that, are more recent and actually, could have more truth, I suppose, or we have access to more, perspectives now. So I think that is a way that I don't know if I break the rules, but you have to
think outside the box, perhaps.
Yes.
All right. So our next question, Carson, I'm going to stick with you. Are there specific subject areas where it's especially important to prioritize collection development?
This is a tough question because obviously all of them are all important to keep in mind. And there's several more specifically that I could think of, but my mind first goes to Indigenous studies or area studies that we have at Cornell, mostly because, first of all, I know because I work with her, but our selector for Indigenous studies is not Indigenous. And I think that's also an important thing to acknowledge, is to, if you are the selector, like liaison, you are the go-to person for Native American and Indigenous stuff. And so, that's a lot of weight, and you want to make sure, we don't have to know everything as librarians, obviously, about the subjects, but to be knowledgeable and respectful and, just be giving the right information with who you are, just as a person involved with that. And I think especially in the sciences, like I mentioned earlier, a lot of Indigenous science, which was the first type of sciences, were not taken seriously, especially with medicine practices. So those were not ever collected really academically. And so that's where you can also fill in the gaps from those times. And that's another thing to look for, is just the gaps. And just because you have a lot of books on the subject of Indigenous, basket making or something, does that mean that you have a diverse collection because of that? Or do you need to, which you do, need to look at the content of this? Was it written by, someone who is not Indigenous? And is that relevant? Is that not? We need to get more, more diverse authors, if you can tell that a large chunk, is not written by people of the same, voice.
All right. Thank you for that. I am going to actually bounce over to Allison now for our next question, which kind of follows from that a little bit. In what ways can technology be harnessed to enhance the inclusion of different voices in library collections? And Allison, I know you had some unique thoughts on this.
Yes. So it's really not a new, innovative thing. but it is about using something that is tried and true in libraries and perhaps just a little different way, and that is interlibrary loan. Interlibrary loan is truly one of the greatest collection development tools that is sometimes well underutilized. Uh, Through the strategic use of ILL, those who are able to collect certain voices, certain items, certain perspectives, or who have historically gone ahead and filled in those gaps where others did not, um, we can actually, as a community, gain access to that material for our patrons, albeit in a slightly different manner than setting a book on a shelf. One way that we really need to think about this, though, is with the use of our electronic resources. And this is where vendors can have a huge impact, and I think possibly should. I'm going to put a little bit of pressure on our vendors in the arena here. I think this is where you really could make a huge societal positive impact. And that's through whole ebook lending and making that available and commonplace. Whole ebook lending is really essential to ensuring that a variety of voices find their way into all of our libraries, not just those libraries in certain communities where all voices are allowed, but into every community, especially those where some voices, some perspectives, some ideas may not be as generally accepted for a librarian to put that idea on the shelf. But if we can borrow from someone else who has purchased it, we did not purchase it ourselves, but if we can borrow and meet that need of the patron there through our regular ILL functions and through the use of whole ebook lending, I think that is a great way that we can make sure that those voices are still discoverable outside of the areas where they are sitting on the shelf, so to speak.
Allison, do you have any, I'm just thinking how all of these, I guess, interlibrary loan requests that you are getting or will get in the future that are more diverse because your collection is not, you can't access it easily. I guess however many turnaways that you're getting and then putting into ILL and receiving from another library, would it hold any weight if you took the titles that, or just the examples of the titles being asked for ILL that you don't have, if they follow a theme of not, or being more diverse titles that you don't have, would that hold any weight, do you think, with showing the numbers to anyone that decides, on these diverse topics? I'm just wondering, because when we have turnaways for like, oh, we don't have that book, I think we do keep track just how many ILL loans we're doing and what titles, and should we have those titles ourselves. And so I'm just wondering if that could ever, I don't know, be something to show just like, hey, we've had this many titles and no one, like we don't have these books, so we're not meeting the needs of the students, I don't know.
So we definitely we have multiple points throughout the year. Our amazing collection assessment team keeps a running dashboard of ILL requests for us, what's requested multiple times, and we have separate ones for books versus journals. And so obviously journals fall into a different category with the Cantu guidelines and all of that, but looking at just the monographs, the monograph acquisitions, we use those to make purchasing decisions, and we feel more justified in purchasing those because we do have an identified need, and typically we don't purchase at just one need. We purchase at multiple indications of need. So yes, we just have to be very careful in how we express that information and how we share out what and how we are using this information to collect. Because the other thing that I have heard recently from one of our subject librarians who works very closely with our trans community is that they don't want their name attached to it. So we have to assure them that your name, your specific name, will not be attached to this, we won't know. That information is scrubbed as soon as it's done. It's not associated in any way, because another part of having these diverse voices is protecting the patron privacy within our communities, especially in a place like Texas or some of the other states where they are feeling less and less welcome. We have to make sure that their privacy is honored and protected in every way that we can. So yes, with the caveat of we would have to be very, very careful.
And it's interesting because I think you would want to be promoting that too, that if we don't have it, that you should absolutely do ILL so that we can get it. And then that is also a statistic contributing to something you could show of, hey, we don't have these. That's interesting.
So I'm going to bring in the perspective of some of our smaller members, because I think Carson, at Cornell, there is a little bit of money to work with that. But what's been nice at the OhioLink level is, and this isn't just around a core collection, but just collections in general, is that, you're starting at the center and trying to get what you can get for everybody, and locally everyone's building on top of that. And I'm equating OhioLink's print sharing kind of with Allison's idea of ILL, where you can have a broader collection in that way, and you don't feel that budget pressure or stress to try to go and grab everything that you can, because everyone's going to feel that there's significant holes in their collections, again, especially in this budget environment. But again, pushing on that whole ebook lending note, that really would help a lot of libraries in a lot of different ways.
All right. Thank you all. All those perspectives are great. And in fact, Allison, some of the comments you made speak to our next question. How can academic libraries effectively prioritize student communities in their collection development strategies? And so what you said about, nobody's name being attached, I think would speak to that question. Does anybody else have anything on that? Carson, I think you had mentioned.
Can you repeat it again?
How can academic librarians effectively prioritize student communities and their collection development strategies?
So I have an example, I suppose, of a good practice that has led to a student and several students showing us a resource that we had no idea existed that is incredibly diverse and so amazing. We would have never known about it if these students didn't come to us and tell us, hey, we just went and met with the woman who organized this resource, and they were like, it's incredible, why don't we have it? And started the whole process for us for obtaining it, which was, incredible. And I think how that happened is that we do in our one-shot courses, or really anytime interacting with a group of students where you're kind of at the front leading or telling them about our resources, is again to just ask and to let them know that if they see anything in their field that's just new or something that they're interested in, to please let us know, because we would love more ideas, but specifically with diverse materials, because it is hard to get to find them. Honestly, like we want to spend the money on these people and on these organizations that are more diverse, and we just need to know, and so I think having that open line of communication and just kind of, fostering relationships where students feel comfortable and want to tell you things are good. And we got Deep Routes, which is routes or roots. It's a little play on words, but it's a POC created, organized one-woman show for agricultural curriculums and recipes, and mainly focuses on the the stuff that was never, published or covered. They have a whole series on important agricultural people who are all people of color. They have recipes that are from people of color, and just the herbs and different places where they came from initially, their uses in indigenous cultures. So these students came to us with, just this idea of
Yeah, that's
maybe
really cool.
subscribing. Yeah, it's incredible. You should all look it up. But again, for agriculture, we're like, yes, thank you. This is incredible, because we wouldn't have known what else could be, bought from that lens. And so, I mean, just really, really having those connections with students and faculty, of course.
And how do you connect with students for that? Do you have an official form where students can request a resource, or do they reach out on social media, or just email the head librarian? I mean, how do they go about that?
So we have a few routes through our websites and online. I believe this request came from a student, I think a group of students asking their professor where they should go and what to do. And honestly, that's great too, because we have really good connections with the professors in the plant science department. And so that just made it very easy for him to be like, oh, of course, talk to Michael and Carson, and just emailed us, CC'd us. I think he was the one too that brought them into the conversation. But other than that, we have recommend purchases on our website. I'm not sure if they filled it out. But yeah, I would say that them reaching out to you, which stinks that it's not always the other way around, but I think that's being open, I guess, to those emails or just discussing with students.
That's great. Okay, and moving on, what are some practical tips for conducting content audits to assess the alignment of a library's collection with the student body and academic curricula? I think, Allison, you had volunteered that you had something you could share here.
Yes, so recently our collection assessment team has done a wonderful internal grant project on doing a diversity audit. They asked me to be on the advisory board for this, and I absolutely agreed. I love this type of thing. I believe they are doing several presentations on it, so I don't want to, one, steal their thunder, and two, they can go a lot more in depth about all of the technical steps that they took. But I will give kind of a couple quick tips for if you consider doing this type of process. First, and I think kind of most importantly, is to define your scope and make it manageable. I think several of us mentioned, going in and wanting to do all the things and buy all the things, and assessing that is, it is not just a molehill. It is very much a mountain, and it is very large. So you want to kind of go after that elephant bite by bite. You'll want to define both the type of material that you're looking at. So whether you're going to look at print or electronic, if you want to look at a specific LC call number range or a genre or something along those lines, and consider publication dates. Like we talked about, it's generally expected that most of our older print items are going to come from a small group of voices. It's most likely not going to be diverse. Knowing that, and instead choosing to focus on where we can diversify, where we are going to be able to find those resources, was really helpful for us in kind of determining that scope and making sure that we didn't spend 5 years assessing one set of data. You'll also kind of want to consider what elements of a person's identity you want to investigate. And this, I cannot stress enough, and this goes back a bit to both patron privacy and author privacy. Sometimes these things will, well, let me put it this way, these things will be difficult to identify. Moreover than that, sometimes it just won't be there. And so anytime you look into this, you need to do so with thoughtfulness and understanding that some of this information is very personal, and it can be very private to the author, to the person choosing the materials, requesting the materials. Some elements such as gender or sexuality change. There are times when an author no longer wants certain attributes connected with them, or an attribute is no longer reflective of them. And so you have to consider and respect that. And one kind of additional warning, some of these elements are not publicly available. And that may be on purpose. That's not because, it just hasn't come out yet. That may be because an author is very guarded about certain aspects of their person. Respect that. Know going into this that you're not going to find all the information. And trust me, I know as librarians, we want to find all the information. That is what we do. We find all the stuff. But in the case of very personal information about an author, it is not within our rights to demand it. If it is not out there publicly available, please do not seek it out. Respect that author's right to some privacy. The second kind of less dire warning, I guess, is to really use your community connections. And I mean both the purchasing community connections, your library community connections, and do focus groups with your students, do focus groups with your faculty. That is where we got a lot of really good information that we may not have found otherwise. And also it kind of helps you understand and know that this is what's important in our community, and it provides more justification for these purchases. You might also consider looking at non-users of the library. So those people who don't come into the library, hey, what would make you come in? What are you looking for? What aspect of yourself are you looking to enhance or learn more about? And a lot of times, including those non-users of the library will get you a lot farther than the people who are always in there, always requesting anyways, which we love. We call them our power users. We love our power users. We know who they are. That one faculty member who always has something to add or say or advocates for the library. We love them and we want them too, but we also want to think about those people who haven't come to us for some reason. And so how can we really bring them in, make them our power users?
All right. And actually, Allison, all that was great and brings us to our final question. Can you provide examples of easy to implement solutions that have made a significant impact on student engagement? I'm going to ask everyone to respond, but Allison, I think you probably already touched on this. Did you have anything else you wanted to add for a solution to, have a greater impact on student engagement?
Yeah, so one thing that we did that was actually super easy and kind of what it touches on what Kirsten talked about is we made a QR code and a real simple sign for all of our subject librarians to take to tabling events, to instruction sessions, when they meet a new faculty member, whatever it is. It links to our new purchase request form, and all it says is what's on your to read list. That's it. They scan it, they go in, they give us the recommendation, and we have a really great insight, quick, easy insight into what our students are wanting, into what our faculty are wanting. A surprising number of students, especially those first generation or international students, are completely unaware that they can actually request things and that we purchase them and then they can check them out. It's kind of like this light bulb moment when they realize, like, oh my gosh, this is a power I have, and they're very excited to use that new power. So when we show it to them and through a quick QR code, real simple sign, it makes it very easy both for our subject librarians to talk about it and for our users to interact with us in that way.
That's brilliant. I love that. You know what, Derek, let's go to you. Any examples of easy to implement solutions?
Well, I think just broadening the scope of collection development for your particular area is one way. But in all of this discussion, I started thinking about how, it's great that we're sitting here talking about this, but we really need to speak about this broader, because we can, buy all of these diverse materials, but if the students if they don't need them, that's the thing. And so we need to be talking to faculty and encouraging them to be thinking broader and thinking more diverse so that, it can show up in assignments and show up in, their research so that, these important things that we're discussing here are valued across the campus and not just, in the little niches that we're thinking about.
That's great. Um, Carson, let's go to you next.
I think I agree with everyone, and I also thought of those things. I believe, maybe on a different note, I recently have been, I think, trying harder or we've been kind of implementing more objects, materials to make the library more accessible, just in general. But I've noticed with the incoming freshmen this year, and this is not like a bad thing at all about them. I have noticed that in terms of finding books in the shelves with the call number is very challenging for them, and I completely understand. I mean, that's a whole language, that we speak, and it doesn't even make sense sometimes to us. So I think that we're aware, like as an organization at Cornell, that students aren't checking out physical books as much as everything else. I think we agree on that. And we know, oh, they can't find stuff and they don't like browsing, they would rather get it quick on a PDF, which why wouldn't you? But I think we might have been giving them too much credit in recent years of like, if you give the call number, they're good. Or if you explain something to them, that you would tell a coworker who's a librarian, like, oh yeah, it's in the stacks over, it starts in that maybe we have to meet them where they are. And I don't think that's a bad thing. And I don't feel like I'm talking like down to them or anything. I think meeting them at a point where I've been giving like physical directional to find the items in the stack, go to the third floor, the elevator's behind you, you turn left. And then this was for a fashion course recently, a freshman FSAD course. And we were showing the materials from the stacks and they were like, this is incredible. Like you were saying, like, you blow their mind sometimes, which is sad when they're like, I can check this out. Yes, you can take it. Oh, please. And so I think because it's Cornell, there's maybe that's what's getting in the way, is that we're thinking that, these kids got into Cornell and they do research all the time. They're going to know. And it's okay that they don't. And if you think about it, with library electives just going away, like everywhere, but also again in the South with all of the things happening in libraries, it's not that easy to use them, and they're not getting that whole like sit down, call number, Dewey Decimal, nothing, I don't really think. And so it's okay. And sometimes I think we have handheld maps right now at the reference desk that we've just been printing and printing every day. They kind of have our like call numbers on the map situation. And so we've been circling, this is exactly where that book is, and offering too, do you want me to go up and help you get it off the stack? Just because even then it's like, good luck on the third floor. I hope you can find it. I don't see them again. I'm like, I hope they got it. So I think just being more aware that, it's hard to use the library, even if you're the average Joe who goes to the library often. I'm still confused sometimes. So yeah, I think just meeting students where they are and providing more materials that are just very direct about where everything is and the procedures of the library and everything.
That's great. And then Amy, any solutions for community engagement?
Yeah, so Carson, you talked a lot about print. I wanted to expand a little bit on what Derek said, but also talk about for OhioLink, we're procuring electronic resources for our members. So I really do think there's some space for us to grow with how we're exposing these materials to our users online in an electronic format. Yes, they're going to Google and they're searching. That's absolutely what they're doing. But once they're on your platform, are there ways vendors can start thinking about, oh, this title is part of X collection by this institution, and maybe they're earmarking, the neurodiversity topic I brought up earlier. Like this is part of a collection that we're really thinking about here. So, are there ways that we can start thinking about this? I know we've been doing it for years and we haven't quite cracked the code, but let's start thinking a little differently about how these collections relate to each other and how they're being discovered online. I really liked where Derek was going on the working with faculty, because that is your in this environment. Your students are going to go where your faculty is telling them to go to get their materials. So for us, I think we're seeing a lot more faculty engagement with our libraries through our affordable learning programs. We're working on helping faculty find OER materials for courses, or specifically for a course objective. And through that process, what they're finding is sometimes there is a resource that the library is purchasing and providing that fits that need. Now, it might not be an OER, but it's still free to the students because it's a library provided resource. And I really do think that's a great way to start exposing faculty and thus students to how we're collecting resources online.
Right. Well, that's great. That brings us to the end of our preset questions. So that brings us to our live Q&A now. So thank you guys for this portion. And now I guess let's go into the live Q&A.